While the aircraft carrier has proven to have value ever since the American Civil War in the 1860s, and created an even more compelling argument during World War I, it was during the events of World War II that really cemented the importance of the carrier. Being able to operate as a fully functioning airbase on what is essentially a man-made island allows for a tremendous flexibility in regards to deploying forces to a combat zone. In the later stages of a land invasion, it even allows for the oversaturation of defensive capabilities of the enemy, as an aircraft carrier is mobile compared to a stationary island. This means it can get as close as the water allows, decreasing the distance an attacking aircraft has to cover on their way to the target and back, translating to a faster turnaround time between attacks. With this in mind, it's clear as to why over the decades, aircraft carriers have become bigger and stuffed with more and more technology. As distance from a home country to the combat zone increases, the logistical component of any operation becomes a nightmare. For example, a bomber group launched from the UK during the Falklands War suffered tremendous issues that plagued the entire operation. This is known as a power projection gradient. The further the distance, the more difficult it becomes to project power, as more time and resources are needed to overcome the distance itself. The aircraft carrier is able to avoid this problem to a major extent by being extremely self-sufficient. It is large enough that it can essentially carry everything it needs to conduct an operation. Naturally, fuel and food is required, but the carrier carries with it its own healthcare, maintenance depots, water facilities, living quarters, and so on. It's safe to say the supercarrier is an incomprehensible asset to any nation. Unfortunately, it's these advantages that make it an incredibly large priority for the enemy. A massive target. If you want to prevent the enemy from being able to launch an unmanageable number of sorties that also don't have the burden of covering large distances, the obvious answer becomes to destroy the aircraft carrier. Since the aircraft carrier acts as an enabler, destroying it takes away any capability it enables. As it stands currently, a tremendous amount of resources are not only spent building and operating these carriers, but a huge amount of space is spent on the defense of these ships. Huge radar antenna arrays are mounted on the tower of the ship, missiles dot the outside, and of course you have the CVES in case anything gets too close. On top of that, a good portion of the aircraft on board the boat are dedicated to actually protecting the carrier itself, instead of providing additional offensive capability, which is the entire point of the platform. The increase in power of the carrier is obvious, and as such a number of counters have been developed over the years. Long-range missiles have been developed and continue to increase in capability. While they continue to grow in cost as well, the increase in capability has been far outpacing the growth of the procurement cost. Russia has always invested heavily into these long-range missiles, and with China's economy growing at the rate that it has, it means it can afford many more. The proliferation of cheaper and cheaper microcontrollers shrinking in transistor size means you can increase the complexity of the controller while even reducing the power requirements, freeing up space in the missile for more fuel and increasing range. Coupled with a capable inertial navigation system, these missiles can even navigate in GPS-denied areas. Doom for the supercarrier? The result of these developments are missiles that have further ranges, more complex in-flight behaviors to account for, and large numbers. It means you can combine several methods into one attack. For example, you can send a concentrated number of missiles in one direction in an attempt to draw attention to a concentrated area, away from missiles approaching from a flank. The low cost also means you can send them at great numbers. Defensive systems are limited in how many targets they can engage simultaneously, and within a given time period, this is known as a saturation attack. This is a method that has been employed by Hezbollah, as Scud missiles are incredibly cheap, meaning they can launch so many that Israel simply cannot stockpile enough missiles to counter them due to cost. With the number of complex missiles available, you could even afford to do both of these methods at the same time. All of these threats facing a continuation of massive concentration of power means that if one supercarrier is lost, then the US is faced with a greater loss than that of 9/11. As a Ford-class carrier cost around $12 billion in upfront cost, billions more with the aircraft and support equipment, and the thousands of people who man the ship. Can the carrier be saved? The concentration of power into the supercarrier has stagnated long before the Ford class for these exact reasons. But with these developments in enemy capabilities, it's clear that not only is stagnation in this trend here to stay, but regression may be in order. Already, we see countries like Japan and the UK opt for smaller and cheaper aircraft carriers. This allows for an increased number of carriers despite the smaller budgets. While each carrier lacks the potential of one supercarrier, it retains an impressive percentage of the capability while costing less in upfront cost. While it is more expensive to operate, however, that cost is offset in redundancy gained by the increased numbers. For example, if a sortie of aircraft have their carrier destroyed, they would have nowhere to land. With two smaller carriers, losing one means you can use the other one as a diversion option, allowing those planes to land and refuel and eventually be sent elsewhere to use later. An increase in the number of smaller, lower-cost ships doesn't only help in attrition scenarios, it also allows for greater flexibility. Future wars will be conducted over massive distances. If you have two objectives separated by thousands of miles, you may find yourself having to prioritize one target over the other. This means the other untargeted asset may continue to operate, and may even strengthen its defenses in the meantime. Any observations relayed from the first base before it falls may help aid in the defense strategy of the second target. With two smaller carriers, it's possible they can attack and overwhelm both targets at the same time, meaning an acceleration of schedule and less opportunity for the enemy to learn and develop counter-tactics. Defensively, this method also allows for greater flexibility, as you have considerably more targets to track in a more spread out area. Each ship would have its own defensive capabilities and could theoretically protect each other in close proximity. When spread out, difficulty in tracking increases. As mentioned before, saturation attacks are almost guaranteed. With each additional carrier, you divide the number of available missiles that can be allocated to each target. With an increased number of carriers, you can also increase the number of platforms to mount sensors. This means an attack targeting one carrier may be seen ahead of time by another, and that information can be relayed as the additional carrier can also act as an additional network relay. Ultimately, the age of the supercarrier is likely coming to an end. As the decades proceed into the 22nd century, the supercarrier will gradually become less and less favorable. Indeed, this has already been foreseen by previously mentioned the Japanese and British navies, but also even longer by the United States Marine Corps that operate assault carriers as opposed to supercarriers. This concept will most likely need to be adopted by the US Navy as decades persist. Not only the United States Navy, but perhaps the Air Force as well. In the next video, we'll investigate the composition of the Air Force of the United States and more in a sequel to this video. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please subscribe for future videos, as the channel seeks to explain complex aviation topics so that the average viewer can easily understand and comprehend. In the meantime, enjoy your dance with the angels.